Sometimes it makes you wanna cry aloud. Sometimes it makes you wanna scream and shout. Sometimes you feel it's unbearable. Sometimes the pain is so incredible. Do I feel the way I feel being a Christian at all?
It's not supposed to be this way.
But who said that it was gonna be easy? Do I have enough in me?
How do I feel like holding on?
How do I feel?
How do I feel like being strong?
How do I feel?
How do I feel like praying on?
How do I feel?
How do I feel like pressing on?
The answer is
Jesus,
hey, my portion.
Jesus,
Yeah, here's my covering.
Jesus,
My maker.
Jesus.
Check this out. Sometimes it's someone that you really love. Sometimes I don't know that you love. Your trust. Sometimes your heart will stop. Can't stop beating.
Anybody ever felt like that? Do I feel the way I feel being a Christian at all?
It's not supposed to be this way.
But who said that it was gonna be easy? Do I have enough in me?
How do I feel like holding on?
How do I feel?
How do I feel like being strong?
How do I feel?
How do I feel?
Tell me how. Oh, how do I feel?
How do I feel like pressing on?
Yeah, how do I feel?
How do I
Sometimes
feel
I
like
feel so down, but I'm gonna hold on. How do I feel? Woo!
being
Tell me, how do I feel?
How do I feel like praying
Praying.
on?
How do I feel?
How do I feel like praying
You know what?
on?
The answer is
Jesus,
He's my Savior.
Jesus,
The calm in the midst of the storm.
Jesus,
My strength and my reward.
Jesus,
The way, the truth, and the life.
Jesus,
He's healed me by His stripes.
Jesus,
Deliverer. Yeah.
Jesus.
He's my Savior every time.
Jesus,
Nobody but
Jesus,
Oh, it's my Jesus.
Jesus,
Every time.
Jesus.
He's my helper. He's my everything.
Jesus.
Oh, how do I feel?
How do I feel?
Yeah.
Holding
Tell me,
on.
how do I
How
feel?
do I feel
Tell
like
me,
being
tell me,
strong?
how do I feel?
How do I feel
Gonna hold on.
praying
I'm gonna hold on. How do I feel?
How do I
Yeah.
pressing
Oh,
on?
the answer is
Phil Laird, PhD, is the Vice President of Innovation, Global and Academic Partnerships at Trinity Western University, TWU, where he functions in the capacity of maintaining a large and growing network of international relationships for TWU, as well as representing the university at key international events with universities and governments worldwide. Laird earned his BA in psychology from the University of British Columbia in 1990, his MA in social developmental psychology from Simon Fraser University in 2003, and his PhD in psychology with a special designation in psychology and the law in 1997 from Simon Fraser University. Laird joined the Faculty of Humanities and Social Sciences at TWU in 1995 and served as a faculty member in psychology, conducting research on moral reasoning, moral attributions, and jury decision-making. Dr. Laird has taught and conducted research in the areas of social and developmental psychology, as well as team leadership and conflict resolution. As the father of 6 children, Dr. Laird brings a wealth of experience in managing interpersonal conflict, negotiation, and diplomacy. So, Holy Hill, Lagos, let's give a warm welcome to our seasoned guest speaker, Dr. Phil Laird.
Understanding that we have a Heavenly Father who loves us, who created us to do great things in this world, who made us in His image first, and then we sinned and have a fallen nature second. And understanding that because primarily God's creation was good and was for good purposes, I believe, God's greatest joy is seeing people thrive and reach their full potential as human beings. And God wants us to have a positive outlook on life, to have strong mental health and strong relationships. And God desires us to flourish in this world. And the flip side to that is, the devil wants us to get, caught in sort of prisons, wants us to be caught in places where we become ineffective. And struggling in mental health is one way that we can become ineffective, and one way that we can have fear and doubt and maybe resentment towards others, which can cause us to really not flourish as individuals and not flourish as God's creation. So I think when we talk about mental health, it's such an important part of our lives, and it's an important part of our relationships. And if you're parents, it's really a critical part of what we pass on to our children as well. And so it's Mental Health Month. I'm very grateful to be here with you, and I hope we can have a great conversation today.
Thank you so much, Doctor. John has actually, or will actually, set us in course for all these questions we received anonymously from some of our congregation members. So what I understand is our mind can be a prison based on the thoughts we have, based on our experiences from other people. So in taking that, the first question we have is, how do you forgive? You mentioned forgiveness when you were speaking earlier. How do you forgive your father who has hurt you so many times in the past?
I think there's a few steps to forgive your father, but to forgive people who are close to us and who we trust. And understand that a parent-child relationship is a very different type of relationship. And I'm not going to get too deeply into it. The parent-child relationship is a relationship of primacy in terms of attachment. And so the attachment we have with our parents is quite a bit different than the bonds we form with other people throughout our lives, because they form the first thoughts we have about and ideas we have about human relationships. So when it's a father who's the one who has hurt you, it's particularly traumatic for the individual. The first part of resolving or forgiving a father is to resolve the resentment that we have. So understand that there are people who experience hurt and then experience resentment, but the resentment over time can also serve a self-serving means for the individual who harbors resentment. Because the resentment can give us a built-in excuse for things that go wrong in our lives, like relationships that fail. So what can happen when we harbor resentment towards a father or another person is it actually can impede us from entering into relationships in a positive way, because we have this built-in excuse for the relationship to fail. So I go into a relationship, it doesn't go well, and I say, well, my father messed me up because of these things he did, and that's why the relationship doesn't work. And so that built-in excuse, in psychology, we call that self-handicapping, creating a built-in excuse for impending failure. And it serves a psychological need for the individual, but it is something that stops us from thriving and moving forward. And so the first thing we have to do is we have to deal with the resentment itself. Um, the second thing is we have to have realistic expectations of our parents. I'm a father of 6 children, and I had this idealistic view of my father when I was young. And there was a point in growing up when I started to see my father more for who he was. And he was just a human. He was a minister, and there were a lot of great things about my father, and there are a lot of things that weren't fantastic about my father. In the same way that I think I'm a good father to my children, but there are a lot of things I do that aren't great, and there are a lot of mistakes I've made along the way. So the second part is we have to have sort of realistic expectations of people. They're not perfect. People are going to make mistakes. They're going to hurt you at various points, and they can still be good people, and still be those that might, do something that hurts you. The third is wherever possible, we need to hold on to the good aspects of those we love, like our fathers. Um, if those good aspects exist, and we need to work through Christ and in our relationship with God to love those even who have hurt us in our past, and showing love and compassion to those who have hurt us can help us, going back to the first point, to resolve that resentment that we have. Fourth thing I'll say is that we have to make sure that we are not unhealthily, I don't know if that's a word, but we are not enmeshed too deeply with our parents. And sometimes our parents will foster enmeshment by making us feel guilty or forcing us to go to events with them or family things. But we have to make sure that we become our own people, independent of our parents, so that they can live their lives and make their mistakes. We can live our lives and make our mistakes and have good things happening in our lives, but we don't have to be codependent on each other for our lives to exist. And so I think that's a really important part for us, to have separation from our parents, to understand they're people, they have flaws, they're created in the image of God and yet fallen, just like we are. And they need God's love and compassion, grace, and we have to extend grace to them as well. And the last thing I'll say is the relationship we have with our parents is something we have for our entire lives. And so even if there's hurt and that forgiveness has to happen, we need to commit to a lifelong journey with our parents. And that might be for some people, that might be a pretty separate journey where you're kind of along dispersed paths, and you touch each other, interface with each other just once in a while along that path. For others, they're a little closer relationships, and depending on the kind of hurt and the kind of parent you have, you might have to have a little bit more separation. But at the same time, it's important for our mental health to do what we can foster strong relationships with our parents, even if that requires sort of forgiveness and dealing with resentment. And the last thing I'll say is that if the challenges we face are so deep that we really can't work through the issues effectively, to seek counseling, maybe family therapy or something that can help to bring back some of the relationship that's healthy and brings back well-being to both parent and child.
Thank you so much, Dr. Phil. It also lends to the instruction that Jesus gave us that we should forgive others so that he can forgive us. And I heard this yesterday. Someone said, we're always looking to God to punish those that offend us. But then when it comes to us, we ask God to forgive us. God, forgive me. I've learned my lesson. But then in the next breath, we're saying, punish them. They're bad. They did bad. So again, it lends to us obeying what God has said, that we should look to forgive others because they're just as frail as we are. So it leads me to the second question, which is still in the area of family, but it's a bit different. So the person says, what do you do if your child or your younger family member says they don't think God is real? How do we handle that conversation?
Yeah, that's a good question. And I've had this conversation with a few of my children over the years, and it's a difficult conversation. So if you're a person like me who, has a living and active faith in God and a relationship with Jesus Christ, to have a family member come to you and say, I don't know if God's real, or I don't know if I believe in God anymore, or other things, it's a difficult conversation. I think the starting point for me has always been that you have to legitimize the individual's desire to question whether God is real. I think one of the mistakes we can make is to dismiss or argue against what they're trying to say. If someone is saying, I don't know if God is real, um, they're struggling with something inside. For someone who's grown up in the church or has had a family that is a Christian family, to then come to say, I don't know if God is real, you can imagine that inside that young person, there's turmoil going on. And arguing with them is not particularly helpful in that turmoil, because you don't want to be the person who is sort of challenging the struggle that they're having. First point. The second point is that not all people experience a linear relationship with God throughout their lives. A lot of people will have a relationship with God, and they will struggle for a period of time, maybe with some disbelief, maybe with some challenges in their life, maybe with some vices that they struggle with in their lives, drug addiction or alcoholism. And it's important that first and foremost, you maintain the relationship with the younger family member. Writing them off or saying, no, you don't know what you're talking about, or why are you doing this? You want to remain a person that they feel like they can come and talk to. And that's most important, because you want them to have a place that is safe, where they can explore the challenges and questions that they have. The Bible tells us we have to test our faith, and our faith has to become our own. And so the process of testing faith and trying to figure out whether you really have a faith in God is a natural part of development. And at certain stages of adolescence, it's a natural part of just questioning the world and existence and all these kinds of things. So it's really important. I think the last thing I'll say is to ask a lot of questions to them and allow them to explore themselves. So in what we call formal operational stage of development, this is where we're developing abstract thoughts. The early formal operational stage of development, so kind of 12 to about 14 or 15 years of age, is a period of time where young people become immersed in thinking about things. They become immersed in what we call, in psychology, we'll often call catastrophic imagination. So they can think about, for the first time, multiple different alternatives to what could or might happen. And some of those things are great and wonderful, and some of those things are terrible. They also have a natural sense of invincibility, that they can do anything and nothing bad is going to happen. So it's important to allow the young person to exercise that sort of ability to think abstractly about a range of things. And so one of the things I would say when someone comes to you and says, I'm struggling with my faith, is to go through the exploration with them. Ask them questions. Now you can direct those questions a little bit, but ask them questions. Ask them questions about, well, how did the world come into existence? How does this work? And how does this work? And how do you think this could work? And what about evolution like this? And what about and if you give them a chance to explore the ideas deeply enough, most young people I've encountered eventually come to a place where they say, there's probably a God. There's got to be something. And eventually they will on their own come to a point, God probably does exist or must exist in some form. And that might be an opportunity to then get into the Bible and talk about the Bible. I think the last point I'll make on this one is that going straight to the Bible with someone who is questioning their faith and not sure if God exists, I would argue is not the best thing to do. Because if they're questioning whether God exists, then they're questioning whether the Bible is true as well. And going to the Bible as the authoritative word is not necessarily going to be helpful for them. They might shut down entirely in that conversation. And so I think giving them an opportunity to explore their ideas, being with them along that journey, helping them by asking questions, but really focusing on the fact that you love them unconditionally, the way Christ loves them, no matter what conclusion you come to in the journey that's on, I think is critically important.
Thank you so much, Dr. Phil. I think also we can also add praying for them also, praying that God would reveal truth to them so that they can come out of it whenever they do come out of it, and we'll be there to support them all the way. Thank you. So the next question cuts across different forms of relationships, in my opinion. So family relationships, emotional relationships, work relationships, and friendly relationships, friendships. Thank you. So the question is, how do you learn to trust after your trust was broken multiple times?
So I'm going to trust you to do something for me. I want to ask a question to everyone who's there at Holy Hill. And I want you to put your hand up if anyone has ever broken your trust. So just a simple question. Put your hand up if anyone has ever broken your trust. I'll put my hand up. Okay?
Yes.
Okay, so how many people have their hands up?
There's quite a number. Let me say many.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay. So here's the thing. The real answer is it's probably everyone in the room. Broken trust is a universal aspect of the human condition. So the starting point to understand is that everyone has experienced broken trust. A person not showing up on time is broken trust. A friend not coming to help when they promised to help is broken trust. A relationship where someone cheats on you in a relationship is broken trust. And I can go through all of the different characteristics, but a business relationship where someone does something underhanded is broken trust. The truth is, first and foremost, that broken trust is a universal characteristic of human experience. Everyone experiences broken trust. So the starting point of understanding how we deal with broken trust is to understand that everyone has to deal with this in their lives. At some point, someone is going to let you down and break your trust. And you're going to have to deal with it. So we're not alone. Everyone experiences this at some point. And it's a universal characteristic of being human, first. Second, we should not try to use trust as a self-protective mechanism. Right? A lot of people will put individuals into two categories, and they're like black and white. So trustworthy, non-trustworthy, that's it. They divide them. And then as soon as someone breaks my trust, they're cut off, like they're done. And the truth is that trust is not something that we should use as a way of protecting ourselves from getting hurt or not getting hurt. There are never guarantees. And there are lots of times where people will break our trust for reasons that aren't designed to hurt us. They're just because they happen. Uh, you know, I'm in a marriage where multiple times I've told my wife I would do something, I would pick something up, or I would show up at a certain time to pick up the kids, and I can't make it, I don't make it, I forget. And if she was holding a ledger of all the times that she trusted me to do something and I missed the mark and I didn't do it, like she'd have a really long list. And if that was her measure of me as her husband and the father of our children, I don't think I would show very well, and our relationship would have a lot of challenges. And at the same time, she loves me, and when these things happen, we work through them in our family. So I think, understanding that this happens in relationship is a key part. Understanding that that it's not about trust, and that's most important. It's about whether we have relationships with people who are trustworthy. What's the character of a person is really important in understanding trust. And I would say that we want to be in relationships with people who have godly character. And we need to understand that even people who have godly character will sometimes let us down. They will sometimes do things that cause us to feel that we've lost trust in them for a period of time. And then we have to build back the trust in the relationship. Last thing I'll say is, and I'll say this because I think it's a really important part of the conversation about trust, is we have to put our faith in Christ first and foremost. And we love people. People are in our lives. People help us to live more full and more complete lives. But we shouldn't be looking at people to resolve our trust issues and to help us with feeling trust. This is something where we need to put our faith in Christ first and foremost, and understand that people are fallen just like we are. I'm fallen, you're fallen. We make mistakes. We don't do things perfectly. And so, rebuilding trust is difficult. It takes time. It takes understanding the character of the individual. But what's most important is to understand that we shouldn't be placing too much faith in the trust we give to other people. And we should be putting our faith in the trust we give to Christ first and foremost. And so that's my response to the rebuilding trust question.
Thank you, Doctor. I wanted to ask an add-on question. So, is it okay to create boundaries while rebuilding trust, or do we still leave it open to whatever happens, and we still have faith in God? So basically, I'm saying, do we create boundaries or we don't?
No, yeah, you're raising a really good question. Thank you. We do have to create boundaries. So when trust is broken, two people become separated, and there's natural barriers in the relationship. And those barriers are self-protective. They protect each individual from the other. And it's really important that the breaking down of those barriers that protect ourselves is a slow and steady process. And, I'll give you an example. If I mentioned, forgetting to pick up my children, which when they were young would happen, I'd be busy in meetings and my wife would say, you've got to pick up the kids from school. And I'd have these little kids sitting in their elementary school and I'd forget. And we'd be getting phone calls from the school saying, your kids are here and no one's picking them up. So I go and pick them up. And for me, after that, if I was supposed to pick them up, I'd get like 5 text messages from my wife, like every 10 minutes, which was annoying. But she would be on me and not trusting that I was actually going to do what I said. And I had to make a conscious effort for a period of time to make sure I showed up, so that she felt like she could trust me again. And I think that's the idea of these, protective mechanisms we put in place. And then slowly, consistency, trustworthiness builds a greater sense of trust over time.
Thank you so much. So are we all okay with that? Are we good? Okay. So our next question, the person says, how do you deal with being in a family where people don't just accept things as they are, but seize every opportunity to assign blame for misfortune to someone or something else? How do I deal with that person or that situation?
I'll start with the fact that people naturally try to assign blame to other things outside of themselves. So the process in psychology is called attribution. Attribution is the process of seeking causal explanations for events that happen in our lives. So, good or bad things that happen. The starting point of attributions is to understand that all human beings have what's called a self-serving bias. Self-serving bias is that we tend to think we are primarily important for successful outcomes. And we tend to think that other people are primarily the cause of negative outcomes, bad things that happen in our lives. So this self-serving bias permeates the kinds of judgments we make in our lives. And one of the challenges with self-serving biases is that if you experience failure and you constantly attribute failure or difficulty or challenge in your life to other people, you will never seek the kinds of growth experiences that you have to go through in order to truly succeed. And so, when we talk about, high performance individuals, people that perform at the highest level, they tend to be very likely to take personal accountability for failures, and to seek ways of changing their pattern of behavior in the future to not experience the same failure. And this helps us to grow. It helps us to develop what we call a growth mindset. And a growth mindset is a mindset that says, failure, difficulty, challenge is simply part of the learning process towards success. And people who blame others, blame circumstances for negative outcomes over and over again, have a tendency to not grow, not develop, and not learn from the failures they experience, and have a tendency to repeat the same kinds of behaviors over and over again. Now, the challenge for a person who lives in an environment where people assign blame for misfortune and assign blame to someone else is that those individuals can become caught in a sort of a negative environment. And we call this a sort of co-commiserating environment, where you can get drawn into the negativity of the people around you, and your behavior is reinforced when you are negative. So someone is blaming someone, and it's very difficult to be the voice that says, no, we shouldn't blame that person. It's our fault that this happened. It's easier to be the person that jumps in there and says, yeah, they were the cause. This is what happened. This is to blame. Church is to blame. The government is to blame. The system's to blame. Everyone else is to blame for my misfortune. And so it's really important for the individual in that kind of environment to try to separate from those things. You don't necessarily have to be the courageous person who jumps in and says, listen, I think we have to take some responsibility for the failing that we've experienced. But maybe some separation from the individuals and a mindset that thinks about what can I do so that this challenge or obstacle or hardship is overcome in the future. How can I grow and develop in the future in order to be successful? I'm not sure if I fully answered that question, but
No,
interested
you did.
to know.
Did we all follow? Yes, so there's a resounding yes here. And it just confirmed. So yesterday, PSJ and I, we went for a mind workshop thing in the morning. And basically, the whole theme was about not looking to blame others because you yourself, you see yourself as a producer. God has made us to produce whatever happens in our environment. So rather than looking at the other person, you take stock of your own position and say, what can I do? First of all, take an audit of what has happened and then see it from yourself. Take accountability, like you said, accountability and say, okay, so what do we do? How do we move in coming out of this or changing things so that it does not continue to repeat itself? That's one. And then two, when you spend so much time blaming others, like in our country now with the state of political affairs, we blame the government and the people at large, as opposed to looking at ourselves. What are we doing or not doing that has caused the result we see? So I love that term, growth mindset. It's very important for each and every one of us to have so that we can actually make changes to what we don't like or what we see and we do not appreciate. Thank you, doctor. So the next question says, what are the things to look out for in building yourself before proceeding to be in a relationship? I think a lot of us would like to know this.
Yeah, it's an interesting question for me because I would probably say, and you might disagree with me, I would say nothing. And I'll explain myself in a minute. I think, God made us to be in relationship. And being in relationship is something that we learn through doing. As long as you have healthy boundaries in your relationships, as long as your public and private self is well protected in your relationship and you know how to peel back the onion of the public and private self in a systematic way. And I hope you know what I mean by that. So when you get in a relationship, how much disclosure do you have in a new relationship, and how quickly do you become increasingly intimate with the person you're in a relationship with? That's something that is important to understand and know. And some people get too deeply into relationships too quickly, and that can be unhealthy. But I believe that we need to expose ourselves to relationships. We need to seek relationships with people and understand that some of those relationships will work, they'll flourish, they'll be great, and some of them won't. When I've talked to my own kids about dating, I say, dating is an exercise of figuring out a match. And you go into a relationship, at the beginning of the relationship, everyone is great and wonderful because they're not really disclosing too much about each other. They're being really careful about what the other person knows. Then they get closer and closer, and then they hit a snag. Something happens and they fight. And then both parties have to go through a process, the two people in the relationship, of saying, do I want to be in this relationship enough to deal with this issue that this person is presenting? And if the answer is yes, then both people have to change slightly to stay in the relationship. If the answer is no, the relationship dissolves. So if the answer is yes, you stay together and you're happy for a period of time, and then you hit another snag. Something happens in the relationship. And you go through the process again. You say, do I want to stay in this relationship? Is it worth it to stay in this relationship? Or is this issue we face too big for me? If it's worth it, you change slightly you stay in the relationship. If it's too big, you exit the relationship. And you go through that process until the two people are so comfortable with each other and so intimate with each other that you come to the conclusion that you say, I think we could spend the rest of our lives together. I think we've now adjusted and adapted and changed ourselves for each other because of our love for each other enough in, in terms of our growth and development, before God, that we can spend the rest of our lives together, and then you're in a relationship with that person for life. But I think that process of refinement in relationship takes some experience. It takes some being in relationship to get there. And so that's why, the question, what do I need to address in myself before I get into a relationship, is, for me, I would say really nothing. I think you have to love God, know that God is first and foremost in your life first. Then you need to seek out relationships with people who love God. Once you do that, you need to allow yourself to go through the process of sorting out and figuring out and understand that the relationship might break up. It might not work out. But my recommendation is that you learn a lot and grow a lot as a person by experiencing relationships with people.
So, do we go into relationships with lowered expectations, or we just still maintain a healthy level of expectations for the person?
I think we have to go into a relationship with realistic expectations, not lowered expectations. Like, I think we want to be in relationships with. This is what I mean. I think when you go into a relationship, you have to know what is most important to you and values. First and foremost, what is most important to you? Are you looking for someone who has, is trustworthy and stable, someone who is a family person who loves family, someone who loves God first and foremost, someone who is honest and hardworking? Like, these are the characteristics. You have to have an idea of what those values are. But there's other little things in relationships that can cause relationships to fall apart. And those little parts that cause relationships to fall apart are the things you probably have to work through as you go through a relationship. I think you have to understand that there is no perfect person in the world. And this might be different from most of you. I don't think that God has a perfect person for everyone to marry. I love my wife, and we have 6 children, and we have a great life together. But I'm a person who believes that there could have been another person that God called me to marry. What's most important is not the person I marry. What's most important is the covenant the two of us make to God to be in marriage together. And I think sometimes we overcomplicate relationships by thinking that God has a person out there, the one person that God has chosen for us. And God knows who we're going to marry. So, sovereignty versus free will is a challenging concept. But I believe that there are many people that we could be in relationship with and be happy as long as God is first and foremost in our lives.
So, I move on to the next question, and it says, as an adult, how do you deal with a parent that says hurtful things when you engage in conversation without going against the scripture that says, honor your father and your mother? How do I deal with that?
Yeah. Well, the Bible also says love your children. I think that the key here is we have to honor our father and mother, and that's biblical. At the same time, I believe, we are called to recognize and to call out abuse when it happens or when there's hurt in a relationship. So, and there's abuse that can happen at various levels. So there's obviously physical and sexual abuse, which is extreme and traumatic, and that needs to be called out. That needs to be eradicated from our parent-child relationships. So we're talking sin at a deep level. I don't think that's what this question relates to. I think this question really relates to emotional abuse of parents. So parents making children feel guilty, parents using language to put down their children, calling them stupid or calling them losers or calling them useless. I think that type of humiliating language from parents to children is more common than we think it is. And I think it does a lot of damage to young people, especially at at your stage of life. I think the first thing is that we often don't know when emotional abuse of a parent is happening. And emotional abuse happens when parents use guilt to manipulate us to do what they want. Or they use their language to demean or belittle us to elevate themselves. And the first thing to recognize when we face the emotional abuse of parents is that it's not our fault. Our parents are making a choice, and our parents are making a choice, and that choice hurts us. The second thing is to understand that we do have a measure of control over whether or not we accept what our parents are saying. And so, we talk about emotional resilience and emotional strength, and I would encourage you to work on emotional resilience and emotional strength. But we don't have to accept the negative comments that our parents make about us. And we can choose to not believe those things. And that's hard. It's easier said than done, but that can be something we do. We need to recognize when our parents are humiliating us and putting us down. And especially when we become young adults, we need to be able to call our parents out for that. To say, I'm not willing to accept what you're saying about me, or, I want to have a conversation with you, but I want you to understand that the language you're using towards me is not respectful. I want to respect you. You need to respect me. And I think building some boundaries in the relationship is really important. And if you're in, I don't know what types of relationships we're talking about, but if those boundaries can't be respected, sometimes it means walking away from the conversation with the parent. So if a parent is emotionally abusive and you've said, here are the boundaries, we can talk to each other, but it has to be respectful. It has to be honoring to each other and honoring to God. If that line gets crossed, say, this conversation is not respectful and I don't want to stay in this conversation right now. And that is a reason to walk away from the conversation. And what you're doing is you're not saying to the parent, you're a bad person, you're a terrible parent, what you're doing is wrong. You're conditioning the parent to say the conversation you're engaging in is not sort of the conversation I've agreed to be in with you. It breaches the kinds of boundaries I've put in place, and I'm going to walk away from that conversation. I don't think you're a terrible person. I don't think you're a bad person. I'm just not going to be in this conversation with you right now. And then recognize that when the parent changes that level of conversation, that you will re-engage and re-enter the conversation. And so if you think of psychology, you're almost conditioning your parents to speak to you the right way by withdrawing the sort of dialogue when it's abusive or controlling or inappropriate, and re-engage in the conversation when it's respectful and when it's treating each other with love and honor in the relationship. I think the next side of this is to understand and internally think through, what impact does my parents' language have on me as a person? What is it doing to me? What is it doing to me psychologically? Is it causing me to feel anxious? Is it causing me to feel depressed? And this is part of this understanding of mental health, because you, as an individual, do need to take responsibility for your own mental health. And so understanding the impact of your parents' language and hurtful thoughts is important, introspection, so that you understand whether there's a negative effect on your mental health and maybe even on your relationships with spouses or partners and friends outside the relationship.
All right, thank you, doctor. You know, there was a time when you gave your answer, there was a bit of a murmuring going on in the house. I think it's because there's the cultural aspect to us here in Nigeria. I would say Africa as a whole, but some parents may not be so accepting of probably standing up to them and telling them, I respectfully look to, you know, disengage from this conversation, from this conversation, you know, because you may be. Because they say, some say, a slap may follow, or perhaps as you're leaving, know that I've disowned you and you're not part of this family anymore. So then you have to go through the process of trying to call elders to come and beg, and, you know, so I guess in a practical way, I don't know if you have anything to say, like taking that into consideration, how we can move, but of course, from the spiritual
Well,
side. Yeah, go on, Doctor.
I'll give you I'll give you an alternative. And I'm not sure if this works because I'm not 100% sure of the Nigerian context. But the alternative is to try to stop the parent and say, do you know how it makes me feel when you say this? And instead of saying, I'm walking away from the conversation, to say, when you say these things to me, it makes me feel like this. Is that what you want me to feel like?
I like.
And I think what can happen then is it can trigger the parent
There's
to
a
go,
round of applause
oh,
going on.
yeah. Because then the parent will go, well, no, I want to love you. But the child can reflect back to the parent, your behavior is making me feel like this. Is that what you want for your child? And if you have a parent that really does love you and is compassionate, it may be a trigger for the parent to change the way they're speaking to you. So,
I love that. So I think for the African context or Nigerian context, that works so well because from
yeah,
our side, it doesn't make us look like we're being combative or shutting them down, but I love the word you use, you're reflecting their words back
yeah,
to them. And then they have to sit down and make a call or a judgment call on, wow, okay, I'm affecting my child this way. Maybe I should hold off on doing that. Wow.
yeah, yeah.
I think that's a nice place to pivot to our audience and get a question or two, because we're mindful of our time. So does anyone have a question? Okay, we have one. Do we have another? Okay. So Dr. Phil, we have two questions for you now.
My question is quite a simple one. I think, how do you manage overthinking? Because for me as an individual, sometimes when God tells me to do something, I talk myself. Oh, I find a way to talk myself into worrying about it, being afraid about it, and then I find all the reasons not to do it. So,
Right.
how do you manage overthinking? How do you take something
Yeah.
that you can do or God has told you to do, and then you talk yourself out of it? So that's my question.
Yeah. Yeah. So I think I'll give you two responses to that. One is, I think one of the things I do, I sometimes overthink as well, is to go through the process of going, well, what's the worst thing that could happen? And usually when you allow yourself to think about what the worst thing that could happen is, you come to the conclusion that the worst thing that could happen is probably not that bad. It's not really as terrible as you think it could be. And when you entertain that thought, and then you say, well, what's the likelihood that the worst thing could happen? Then you come to the conclusion that it's pretty low likelihood. Then when you say, well, what could I do to ensure that the worst thing that could happen doesn't happen? you start to feel like there's a lot of things I can control to make sure that doesn't happen. So an example would be speaking up in front of people. Say, well, if I go up in front of people, it could be terrible. I have to speak, God's calling me to speak or to preach, but it could be really bad. So what's the worst thing that could happen? Well, the worst thing that could happen is embarrass myself and say something that's crazy. And people will laugh at me. Okay, what's the likelihood that that would happen in a congregation or in a setting where I know the people? That's probably not very likely that they're going to do that. And then you say, well, what could I do to ensure that doesn't happen? Well, I could go through a lot of preparation and have very detailed notes and make sure I'm doing my work to ensure that everything's put in place. And then you come to the conclusion that, yeah, it's probably pretty safe for me to step out in faith and do this under those right conditions. So the first thing I would say is that you go through that process actively. Second thing is that I think all of us as Christians need to be people of action. There's a really good book I've got on my shelf called The One Thing. And the book, The One Thing, is a simple book. It says, if you wake up every day and figure out what the one thing that if you do it today, it's going to make everything else easier and make your life better, or make your passion and mission and calling in life better. And you commit yourself to do that one thing, you become a person of action, because most people don't accomplish one thing in a day. But if you start saying, I'm going to accomplish one thing every day that makes my life better, that improves my condition, that improves the lives of people around me, over a year, that's 365 things that you've done that have made a change. And if you start to live your life that way, you eventually become a totally different person than you were when you started that exercise. So I think those are two pieces of advice.
Thank you, Dr. Chris. Okay, second question.
So I have a mother who comes to my house and I find that she steals money from me. Now, when I was younger, apparently my mom used to do the same thing to my dad. And we used to end up having more money for school. So there was this thing where we're going to school. My dad, everyone knows he doesn't give money. And then as we're going, my mom will call us back and just give us some money to hide in our back pockets. Now, years later, she comes to my house and my money is missing. And everyone I know, I don't play with my money. I know exactly how much is there. In fact, the way it was arranged and all. And then the next thing, my nieces and nephews are saying thank you for a gift I'm supposed to have paid for. So it's affecting my mental health. I don't know how to tell my mom that this, like when you were saying just now, this your behavior is making me feel one kind towards you and me. Yeah. So I just want to know a practical way of, because I know it's done out of love. I know that, it's done out of love, but it's affecting me.
This is a tricky one because I don't know you, but I think my question for you maybe to think through is, why is it affecting your mental health? Is it because you feel a sense of loss of trust in your mother? Is it because the money that she's taking matters to you, like it's your earned money and you feel like you have a right to that money or to decide what's done with that money? So it's a control issue. Or is it the deceptive nature of your mom taking the money? So the starting point for me would be to understand what is it that's primarily causing the sort of angst and the mental health issue for you. The other thing is maybe if the loss of the money itself is not a challenge for you, like the fact that she's taking the money is not a significant financial burden to you because it's a small amount of money, but your mom is trying to show generosity, I think, as far as I understand, story to others, but using your money without your permission. I wonder if there's a way of talking to her about that and saying, I'm happy giving you some money to be generous to people around, if that supports you. But I prefer for us to talk about that and for me to give that to you rather than for you to take it. I'm not sure if that's a conversation you could have with your mother, but it sounds like she's trying to show generosity with means that she doesn't have. At least that's what I hear you saying. And so maybe a conversation like that would give her a sense of feeling that she can be a giving person without having to take from you against your will and knowledge.
Thank
Thank
you.
you. Thank you so much.
So are we good on the questions? Although I wanted to balance because we had two guys give a question. Do we have a lady with a question to round us off?
The question is, how do you deal with emotionally unavailable men?
Ooh. Nice.
How do you deal with emotionally unavailable men?
Yes, her
Well,
question was,
I
how do
don't.
you deal with emotionally unavailable men? Yes.
Yeah, I think that's a long answer to a question. There are men who, if you think of attachment style, and I'm not going to get into the adult types of attachment, but there's a type of attachment style that's called a dismissing attachment style in adulthood. A dismissing attachment style is an attachment style where a person has a very positive view of themselves and their own worthiness of love and attractiveness, other kinds of things. But a very low view of the um, worthiness of extending love to other people. So these people are called dismissing. They get into relationships, but they dismiss the need, their feelings of need for other people. And often they become emotionally disconnected. The type of person, often men fall into this category, and women, on contrast, often fall into what we call a preoccupied category. So more preoccupied with trying to be in a relationship and earn and win the love of a man. And I can get into why that happens. Men are often dismissing, where they kind of feel like, well, I don't need the love of a specific person because I can get lots of people to love me. It doesn't matter. And often that results in a man acting emotionally unavailable. And the best way of resolving that is, one, don't get into a relationship with a man who's emotionally unavailable. Two, if that doesn't work, if you really do like someone who's emotionally unavailable, I think this comes back to an earlier answer I gave, which is you have to work on peeling the onion of the individual back. And it has to be slow. And so you can't expect someone who's emotionally unavailable, who maybe is even purposely disconnected from their emotions, instantly be a lovey, touchy, feely kind of person. You have to give them time to peel off the layers of their emotional disconnection. And that means probably being pretty systematic about increasing intimacy slowly so that person can become more comfortable with emotional connectedness. And if those kind of peeling the layers back over an extended relationship doesn't work, then it's probably time to move on if you're uncomfortable with the level of emotional connectedness with the person.
I agree. I agree. Thank you so much, Doctor. So yes, we're done with our session today. And again, we just want to say a big thank you. Can we have a big shout of thank you to Dr. Phil?
Thank you.
And we say, God bless you. We ask that God will bless and continue to enrich you in every assignment that He has called you to do. He will bless your wife and your lovely children, and your life will continue to produce fruit for humanity as a whole, in Jesus' name. Thank you, Dr.
Thank you.
Phil.